Finding Lives. We're so excited today to have Jonathan Reynolds with us. We'll talk about the leadership revamp. We'll discuss whether or not we have a leadership crisis, what we can do about it, what soft skills involvement within this topic, and many more interesting insights that Jonathan will share. So let's dive right into it. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. Would you
Thank you
like
so much for having me.
would you like to give an intro? How do you want the world to know you?
Sure. Thank you for the space and for the question. And thank you again for having me. Again, my name's Jonathan Reynolds. For those of you that I haven't met, I am the CEO of Mindful Life, Mindful Work. I've spent nearly the last 3 decades interested in mindfulness and mindful applications, and really got interested because of my own path and my own practice and the benefits that I saw for myself. So then wanted to translate those benefits in a systemic way. Years ago, I was trained as a therapist, and Mindful Life, Mindful Work offers coaching, consulting, training, assessments in the B2B space, but we also have a community offering. We have something called the Mindful Professionals Network to support people that are interested in developing this mindful approaches to life and work. And yeah, I'm excited to have the conversation today. It's a fascinating topic that's near and dear to my heart.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this. I'm wondering, out of the conversations you're having with leaders, how often mindfulness is being brought up. Actually, if you were to give a vague statistic, do you think the majority of leaders they're talking about it, or are we still behind when it comes to such conversations?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, part of the reason Mindful Life, Mindful Work has its name is because we actually stayed a little bit away from the word mindfulness for a while because we wanted to be more in the conversation around what was helpful and useful. And for some folks, the word mindfulness or the word mindful translates sort of immediately into mindfulness. But for some, it means attention or focus or care or integrity, all sorts of different things. We are seeing more and more that the moment we say the word mindfulness, that people are sort of often relieved. Leaders are often relieved because that's sort of what they were thinking. But I think there's still, I mean, we're still in a growth period here. We're still in a gradual slope on who really wants to onboard and affect the entire workplace culture with mindful approaches and who wants to sort of make sure their employees have more resistance. And sometimes that can be a little bit loaded on both sides. It can be this, oh, wonderful that you're supporting your employees, but it can also be, what are you supporting them to do? To overwork? And so how this gets balanced out, I think, will be an integrative process over decades.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you the gist of this webinar's question. Do you think we have a leadership crisis? And how do you define a leadership crisis?
That's a great question. And I think the resounding answer is yes. But I would even pull it back to we just have a crisis. We have a crisis of meaning and purpose in the world around what it actually means to live a good human life. I mean, when you look at the 40s and the 50s, people sort of fell into tracks, and there was sort of the cookie cutter model of what a family is and what a job is, and you wear a suit and tie to work and all sorts of things, and that was comforting and comfortable and worked and on the efficiency level, but it didn't really actually create this capacity, or at least it doesn't translate into this era, to create happiness. And so I think just generally we have a crisis where, the great resignation or whatever they're calling it, is people sort of woke up during COVID and said, I don't actually enjoy what I'm doing. I don't think I care about it at all. The only reason I do it is for a paycheck.
Yeah.
And that's just not good enough for people anymore. We've really gone through, we're a knowledge equity world these days more than a sweat equity. Of course, everyone falls where they need to fall and finds their roles based on their affinities and what they like. But there's a knowledge equity thing happening these days, and a real movement towards people being nurtured as full human beings. And people know they can be nurtured. That sort of came, 25 years ago when companies started to have ping pong tables,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, and like cool drinks and stuff like that. And it was fun to go to work. I think we've deepened even beyond that. I mean, nothing wrong with those things, but I think that now people really need flexibility. They want trust. They want autonomy. And then that comes back to leaders, because leaders that are non-relational and we're just super smart people are no longer the best leaders. Do you have to be smart to be a leader? Hopefully. But you have to be relationally smart. And, there's different kinds of intelligences, not just IQ, there's EQ. And then there's all these other sorts of relational, subtle intelligences that if leaders don't have, they're just not going to last. I mean, the book Good to Great, of course, was a pivoting, monumental turn and sort of exposition on how important it is. Uh, any company can have a great year or a great quarter. Who cares? I mean, of course, the shareholders care. But when you look at stakeholders across a broader spectrum, uh, and if you're playing a long game, if you're not just trying to like grab and go, and you're trying to actually provide value over time, a different leadership model is needed, a longer game version and vision.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've reached an epitome where I think leaders have no option. They have to listen and to adapt and to really cater to the people, which I think, depending on who you ask, still people believe that, oh, maybe HR related culture things are nice to have, but they're not anymore. Like, you can't sustain a business without culture being in the core of it and having a sustainable approach to how we retain talent and how do we really make them better, not just to work for us, but for them as human beings, like for the long term. And it's very fascinating to me. I mean, I think many leaders are trying to figure out, how to navigate this ambiguity of, okay, what is the right way to create a long-term strategy for not just HR, but really everything nowadays. Like, we live in a world where I think things change from one day to the next, and sometimes even the most strategic thinkers struggle. So they oftentimes go to coaches like yourself. And what I'm hearing from talking to human coaches is that today the terminology of a coach has also changed. It's not just an executive coach that guides you on how to increase revenue or how to deal, with a board meeting, but more about how can you fix your personal life to actually perform in your professional life. And we see this open conversation now. And to your point, if someone is not happy with their work, they will leave. They won't just stay to suffer. And it's so interesting. So have you experienced this change when you coach others, that they're coming to you for other reasons now?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you expect people to execute and perform at optimal levels, it's got to be built around people.
Hmm.
If it's not built around people, at some point the people are like, "Oh, I'm not nurtured to shine or be my best in this equation. I'm going to go find a different equation. I'm going to go find a different company that actually understands how to support people." Do leaders come to me with all sorts of different stuff? Sure. Some come with obvious stuff, like I want to grow in my career, or I want to develop my leadership style, or I want to make more money. Some come with a more holistic approach, and they recognize that all of these pieces are interdependent because they're the one executing on them. They're the one
Hmm.
sitting in traffic going to work. They're the one working. They're the one coming home tired to a family or whatever their home situation is. They're the one with pets and how they relate to their, I mean, the way that we do anything on some level is the way that we do everything. So if we walk fast all the time, how do you think we eat? We probably eat quickly too. And so it's really about recognizing, that's where mindfulness comes in. It's recognizing that the operating system for a person is where the best of the work is. And those leaders, and ultimately, because we're relational social beings, very few of us live out in the woods all by ourselves. Some do. But if you live in a city or interact with, 5 or more people a day, which is almost all of us, it's relational. And so even if a senior leader comes to me with, "Oh, I need to leverage my team to double our revenue," that's a relational question. That's not a strategic, manipulative, how do I, wring these people to the core to get the most out of them? It's and almost any question, I mean, even a question like supply chain. Well, how do you get the supply chain happening? Relationships. I mean, everything comes down to relationships. And a leader that doesn't recognize that and is just trying to figure out their side of the equation in isolation, that leader's doomed because they don't recognize that they're embedded in a system. And we all are embedded. We're embedded in the system of our local township. We're embedded in the system of Earth. We're embedded in the system of the universe, our company. We're embedded in the system of our own intrapsychic relationship to ourself. And if we don't recognize that, you can move the pieces around all you want to pretend you're going to fix it. It's not about being smarter in that sense. We need that, of course, but it's about bringing this awareness. And awareness is slightly different than intellect. Awareness holds things in a different way. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yes.
I think it's central.
And it's very powerful. What I love about it is that you talk a lot about soft skills. Whether you call it soft skills, power skills, to me, it doesn't matter. It's really essential skills that can help us develop as humans, can help us push the human capital further across industries and society. So, in your opinion, what are some of the key soft skills that make an effective leader? You talked about like relationships, and I'm assuming empathy is in there, but what would be the key, like, let's say, three skills for you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just for a second, I want to mention the term soft skills. I don't have any problem with it, but I know some people push back on soft skills a little bit as a term. Um, I like that. I like this. There's the hard skills like math and science and intellect and stuff like that. And then these other skills, the emotional intelligence skills. So there's the hard skills, and then these are the really hard skills. These are the harder skills. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why it's easy to learn how to do math. I mean, math is difficult, but there's rules. And once you know the rules, you know how to do it. Um, these take a real presence, and whether that's an executive presence or personal presence. So at its core, all of this stuff that we're talking about, all of this, whether it's empathy and compassion or taking joy in the success of others, um, it all boils down to self-awareness and noticing our own experience. And that's where mindfulness is really, I think, one of the best tools that I've discovered, and why I practice it personally, and why I share it with clients when they feel it's appropriate and they're ready. Because it's our self-awareness that informs us when we're not being empathetic, when we're not connecting. I, in my own experience, find that when I clear away the barriers to empathy and compassion and other soft skills, uh, that my nature is actually caring, is
Mm-hmm.
actually, so in a sense, we're not developing those things. We're just getting rid or clearing away the things that we've learned, the conditioning that prevent us from expressing those things. So you named empathy. Yeah, I think it's up near the top of the list. Also resilience, also a willingness. I mean, our first call, our first meeting, we didn't really know why we were meeting. I mean, we sort of had some idea, but mindfulness creates an opening and a trust that something might come of this, and a curiosity, not like, oh, I don't see anything on her profile that really matters to me. Like, if we're just using our mind, we often just see separation. Mindfulness brings this cohesion. Analysis, which is what the mind does, is a cutting apart of things so we can understand them. But mindfulness helps create a synthesis, a bringing together of whole experience. And that is really valuable because one without the other is imbalanced.
Mm-hmm. You talked about conditioning, which I have studied a lot when I did psychology, and the lens I bring is also the technology lens, right? And with AI, what I notice is that bringing those patterns in front of someone can be very easy now with technology because we can track their behavior, their emails, anything really that they do during the day today can be tracked. Hopefully for good reasons, not to hold them, hostage in a company, but to me, the fact that you can bring, the the person's awareness to what they've been doing over time makes them self reflect in a way that they might not do because of how fast life goes. And I do think there's some people that are more likely to find mindfulness because of their experiences, like you did, or I know like my sister is very much into yoga and this lifestyle, and it's something she was really drawn to. But I think there's also a lot of other people that might discount it at the beginning, or they might not find it really for them. And there are ways that, again, they can face some things that they're doing that might click, and they say, oh yes, I actually do, for instance, talk too much during the meeting, or I don't create space for others, or I'm being way too serious, or my tone is not exciting, like all these things that make us who we are. Sometimes we take for granted without realizing that there's space for improvement, or just noticing them. So to me, technology is changing the game when it comes to this. But from a non-technological lens, in your opinion, what are some ways that you have persuaded someone to see mindfulness in a different um, light, like when they come to you and they're like, oh, this is not for me? Have you found a particular way to explain to someone in simple terms that mindfulness can change their life?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think that at its core, mindful life, mindful work, and my work has been just that, is translating to create accessibility, applicability, psychological safety around something new. And it's part of the reason we didn't use the word mindfulness for the first 15 years. We didn't have to use the word mindfulness to talk about attention or awareness or notice how your knee feels or notice when you're sad. And so I think the way around that is to not use the word,
Mm-hmm.
is to direct people to their experience. That's ultimately what mindfulness is. It's a direction and attentiveness to our own experience in a new and subtle and continuous, when possible, way. And so I use words like tracking, like, oh, track that feeling in your shoulder. They're like, oh, I feel tightness in my shoulder. Well, track it. Let's just observe it for a minute in silence. And after the minute, just tell me what you noticed. I don't have to say the word mindfulness and scare them off if that word doesn't resonate with them. But they just did something mindful. They practiced a mini mindfulness, noticing their experience in their shoulder. And so I think that's really important. I mean, just like in anything psychological, speaking to your audience, learning what they're comfortable with. And it's not just about learning what they experience as value, it's also about assessing what they might be afraid of or reject. I mean, most L&D leaders or HR leaders that I talk to, they're really assessing whether we're going to come in like some heavy-handed weirdos with this mindfulness magic. They want to make sure that we're not going to come in and shame and make everybody feel awkward. And
Mm.
and and that's a really important thing for an HR or an L&D leader to assess for. They want something that meets their culture, supports their culture where it is, doesn't tell everyone they're doing everything wrong, and now you got to just do an hour of mindfulness every day at lunch. No, they want to be like, how's this actually going to work? That's why the word's accessible and applicable. If it's not useful and people don't do it, it's not useful. And no matter how magical it is, yeah, would it be great if everybody meditated for 20 hours a day? Yeah, nobody's going to do that. And so you have to find what is possible. And so I call that slicing the risk a little bit thinner. You find out where the risk tolerance is, and then you back off from it because you want it to be so easy. Oh, can you guys, send confirmations when somebody sends an email? Can you just write back, got it? That would help a lot. Just something that simple. I mean, how many work cultures, just something that simple would change everything, because nobody ever knows if people receive their important messages. They're always left wondering. And so stuff like that, like you start to, if you're really making changes, it's got to be so easy that people are like, oh, I can send got it.
Hmm. So, how have you seen cultural differences influence the perception of the practice of leadership? I know you are in many states, many different probably cultures that you've been exposed over the years. So, are there any examples maybe you can share on yeah, these cultural differences?
Well, I think generally, even though there are cultural differences now with the internet, some of those gaps are narrowing across countries,
Mm.
for instance. But there's different types of cultures. Like in the Bay Area where I am, there's a lot of young people in tech. That group is a little more accessible. That doesn't always necessarily mean a good thing when it comes to mindfulness. Sometimes they're all sort of hem-ha, I've heard it already. And then there's other cultures. There's industries that are more old school, like healthcare, insurance industries, financial industry. I mean, even technologically, some of these industries are very slow to onboard new systems, and for good reason. There's a conservative approach around money just generally in the United States, and not just about like fiscal spending, but just generally how it's held in everything. And so, but I think there is an openness. I think there's a natural tropism, to use a biological term. There's a natural inclination towards more opening, more tolerance, more curiosity around new things, just generally because people really know there's a lot of new things because of the internet. And I think mindfulness is sort of caught on. It's a little bit of a, maybe we've heard the term Mick mindfulness, right? It's a little bit of a buzzword like McDonald's or something. Like it's people do it even though they don't know why they do it, sort of thing. And but it has to start somewhere. I don't believe that's a negative thing. I believe you start at the beginning. In my own mindfulness practice, for the first 3 years, I pretended to meditate. I didn't know what I was doing. Nobody knows at the beginning. You just do it because you think it has some value or might have some benefit, and then you run an experiment. If I would have discovered early on that it was useless to me, I would have discarded. I discovered that it was very useful.
Yeah, it's connected with the resilience that you mentioned earlier. Like you have to be open-minded first to try, but then you have to also be resilient in the uncomfortable situation that you might be in till that moment happens. And it's the same thing like building a business, and it's always about getting out of your comfort zone and then just fine-tuning based on the feedback you get, and in this case, is how you feel after. But I remember, tried meditation years ago, and I would always end up sleeping. I would like get so relaxed and then just sleep, and I'm like, there's no point in this. But I also found out eventually it has, huge effects in making me feel more relaxed, especially after a long day. But I think different things work for different people for sure. And for instance, I bring always the example of introverts versus extroverts, like how differently people can get energy. It's just you have to know in your core who you are to understand what's the best practice for you. One of my colleagues loves going on hikes. I can do that. I would feel like exhausted. I think everyone needs to balance it with their daily lives as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, in your opinion, what would be some takeaways, some maybe advice for younger people trying to seek ways to strengthen their soft skills, maybe outside of work? And I'm sorry, I look so crazy with this. The sun is coming on my face, but ignore.
For I would say that start slow. Again, make like the ego likes to say, "Oh, I meditated for a half hour or 45 minutes."
Mm-hmm.
With clients, I often start with 1 minute, and they sort of laugh and think that's silly. But it's not about how long you meditate; it's about consistency. So then I say, "How about 1 minute every day for a year?" And then it's clear that it's not funny. It's actually about commitment to the practice. The practice will guide us. It's about committing to practicing, and then the practice will extend when and if needed. The
Mm.
other thing that's really essential is community. Finding a community that supports us. That can be something, if we're practicing mindfulness, like a local meditation group or something like that. If you're interested, the Mindful Professionals Network, that's sort of what we're designing worldwide, is having people to bounce ideas off of and meet with semi-regularly to sort of to remind us of our priorities and our values. Because when we onboard sort of a new practice or a new priority or value, it's easy to sort of just slip back into old habits. And if we really value it, we need some support in those early stages to sort of remind us of our commitment. Ultimately, the word mindfulness in the ancient languages of India meant things remembered. So mindfulness, the word in Sanskrit was smrti, and the word in Pali was sati. It means things remembered. So it's really about remembering to come back to the present moment and to ourself, because we can spin out in story. We all do all day long. I mean, what's the Stanford study? Like every day we have like 85 or 90% of the same thoughts that we had the day before. And so I think those things are really important.
Yeah, 100%. I think that the community aspect is just so important globally, like no matter where you're from, it's something that will always stay. And I think that there is a movement, towards obviously online communities, and there's a ton of like Slack groups, and every day there's new community coming up. So I can understand how it is sometimes overwhelming for people, and they don't end up really becoming super integrated. So just okay, I have an account there and I have an account there, but I think it's very important to be mindful about which communities you'll join and how you want to contribute and what you're looking for, and not feel FOMO that a lot of us do on a daily basis, especially in the city. There's just so much going on, and it takes some discipline to say, okay, I won't go to like 10 events this week, but I'll go to one that I know is truly for me.
Mm.
So, how have you maybe found a way to create your community? Like, what were some things that you followed to be able to create such a strong community? You have like 60K followers and you're
Mm.
all around. So, if someone is looking to create that community for themselves, what would you advise them to do?
Well, I think number one is patience, and
Mm,
number two is consistency. 20 years ago, I looked in the mirror and said, my own practice has supported me well. I want to share it. Who do I want to be in the mindful space? And so sat with that, and then said, okay, this is who I want to be, and just started little by little. I didn't force myself to post on LinkedIn, for instance, or other social media. I just did what felt right when it felt right. I didn't force myself. Over time, it grew to regular postings and things like that, but never was it I have to do this. It was what actually is flowering in me that wants to be done. And so then all the social media accounts got built out, then Hootsuite and things like this so there was no sort of, oh, I got to get these things in place. It was really organic.
mhm.
So I think that consistency of messaging, and then recognizing that if something is real, if a practice is real to us, it should be sustainable. And for me, something is sustainable when it doesn't have to, but potentially I can do it forever. If I'm just trying to blast through it to get to the end point so I can be done with it, there's a time to do that on projects and things like that, but those aren't sustainable ways of being.
Right.
And so find the sustainable way of being and do that. And then the right things that you want to attract will come to you. I mean, the Mindful Professionals Network just went through a recent pivot to where we're really focusing on events now, because that's what I want to do. I want to bring people together. I want to bring them together in person. I want to bring them together for mindfulness practice. I want to bring them together for author talks and presentations. So that's what we're doing.
Mhm.
And so, but again, on a certain level, those aren't decisions. Those are feelings. Those are like gut, like this feels right. I want to be around mindful people. I want to spend my time. Part of the reason I became a coach after being a therapist for a time was I basically just wanted to be in mindful relationship all day long. I didn't want to finish a yoga class and then have to go to a job I didn't like. I wanted to be in that energy all day long. And in a sense, that's the space I hold for clients. We're doing relational mindfulness all the time, all day long.
That's awesome. That's great. So to bring it back to emotional intelligence, in your opinion, how can the development of emotional intelligence enhance a leader's ability to, navigate through these complex situations and there's so much going on in the world today. So how can emotional intelligence help them create strong teams? Because I can understand for someone that comes, for instance, for you for coaching, they're asking questions like, okay, how can I build my team, and how can though we make them understand that through building emotional intelligence they will do this anyways, like
Mm-hmm.
it's an outcome.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that prevents strong teams from being built is unconscious toxicity, uh, doing things that people don't know are harmful, but are harmful. And so mindfulness helps us recognize what it actually means to nurture people and systems of relationships. And to, it also softens our sense of me and you and starts to feel more like us. And then we can, I mean, some leaders have a hard time celebrating the success of their team members because they feel like it shows that they didn't succeed as much. And so there's all sorts of things like that with a self-awareness and social emotional skills that allow a leader to really do what's needed to lift everyone up. I mean, because ultimately people want to perform at their best. When people aren't performing at their best, it's not always their problem. It's often the problem of the context. Good leaders leave toxic situations because they're like, the hell with this. I'm going to go where I can be excellent. Good leaders stop sharing their ideas if it's not a safe space to share them. If they don't get credit for their good ideas, they're not going to share them. And
Yeah.
there's all sorts of things like that that come out of being more aware, like, oh, how do I cultivate my people? Because again, if people are executing on the initiatives, you got to make the best people you can and support them in being their best. And a leader who recognizes that, what's the saying? A leader doesn't create followers. A real leader creates more leaders. And if a leader's not doing that because they feel self-conscious about people surpassing them or all sorts of things, they're the wrong person for the job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So is it fair to say that you think, mindfulness and sustainable thinking can solve the crisis in which we're in, the leadership crisis?
I don't think it's the only thing that's needed, but I think it's a really important piece to changing the world for the better, both in a leadership sense, in a business sense, in a personal sense, regarding all conflict. Conflict is sort of the recipe or the necessary piece for compassion, but it's how you respond to conflict that either creates a coming together and a compassion or a pushing apart. And so I think mindfulness lets us not be reactive in those moments when it's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we just have to let it unfold and be okay with difficult experience.
Mm-hmm.
And a leader that can't do that is always running around like a chicken with their head cut off, trying to put out fires. Um, if you're mindful, those things still need to be addressed, but not in some frantic, catastrophic, like the end of the world is happening. That's a pretty good sign that somebody's not grounded.
Yeah, what I really enjoy when users of Dextago come and tell me how they use the platform is they say, I thought, I'm good at X skill, and I find out from like feedback from the coach and how I respond that I'm actually bad at this, but I'm good at that skill. And I'm reflecting on, what I said, and I now want to do better because I know I can do better and I know
Mm,
where I'm lacking. And I think that's number one. Like sometimes people don't get the feedback they need from their environment, or it's such a toxic environment that they can't really comprehend how to get out of it. And it's so important to find, I think, the strength within you if you feel like you're not in the right place to live, but also if you see someone else struggling and they just don't know better at that moment, to give them that education to be able to make better decisions. Because holistically, um, we're all being impacted. Like one person can ruin a company the same way like one friend can ruin a friendship, etc. So I think it's so important to highlight that these human skills that we're talking about today are also fragile, and they need a lot of strength a lot of time to be put in order to develop to a level that cannot be affected from others.
Hmm.
So it's something I find super challenging, but in a good way. That like there's always more work to do, and I don't want people to feel discouraged if they see, for instance, that they have something they want to work on, but it doesn't happen tomorrow. And I love the example you brought about meditation because it's exactly the same. It takes a lot of time to start seeing the positive results.
Hmm.
So to conclude, I have one last question for you, Jonathan, which I ask all my guests, and this is if you have a mantra, what motivates you on a daily basis?
A mantra, my daily. Well, at the end of every practice, I say something, and I'll say it here. If any benefit or merit has arisen from this day's practice, let me offer it to the peace and well-being of all beings. May all beings be happy and free. And so I don't know if I'd call that a mantra, but I do use it to close experiences because I think it's an acknowledgement that my efforts and the efforts of communities that I've helped cultivate, we're trying to make the world a better place for everyone. And again, that's not purely altruistic. That's about, we need to make money along the way. We need to have financial systems in place that can create sustainable benefit for everyone in the world. And I think that's the idea behind like conscious capitalism, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's this, we're just getting started as a species.
100% agree. Is there anything else you want to add that we didn't discuss, maybe in terms of the topic or where people can find you?
Well, I'm grateful to be invited and to have such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for that invitation. People can find the Mindful Professionals Network. There's a link on my profile on LinkedIn. There's a link on our website, mindfullifemindfulwork.com. There's also mindfulprofessionalsnetwork.com. And yeah, don't be a stranger. Beginners are welcome. We're trying to make something that's accessible for a full range of folks. We want to create a movement. That's the effort.
And you're starting the movement in New York too, right? In
Yeah,
November?
yeah, you helped us find a space. Yeah, and we've launched all over. We're looking at Paris. We're looking at Lisbon, and we're looking at Switzerland. We already have one in Melbourne, and we're looking at South America. And so, just planting little seeds all over the place because you have to plant a seed if you want something to grow.
That's amazing. I'm so happy to be part of this and to have this conversation with you as well today. I would love, yeah, to have you back and discuss after maybe a time some success stories of how the movement grew. That would be very cool to see the progress.
Well, I'd love to do that again sometime as well, and look forward to being involved in your work to whatever degree feels right. And yeah, this feels like a great beginning.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for everyone listening. Take care, and we'll see you in the next event. Bye bye.
Bye bye.